Leo.
Well, we'll probably need Leo.
I dabble.
Yeah, the first part we may not need Leo. There's no math mentioned, like in terms of,
Right.
actual doing math, but so we're fine. But he can just rewatch and catch it, kind of catch up. Okay, so we're live now. All right.
Yes,
can I
live.
share my screen? So we're fine.
Hey,
But he can rewatch.
hold on a minute. Yeah. What did I do?
Okay, I silenced.
All right.
My
I'm
YouTube.
sorry, guys. Okay, we're good.
Okay. Give me a second.
Yeah, I dabble a little bit in logic and set theory and category theory and abstract algebra, but I don't know shit about algebra.
Yeah,
I'm really bad at algebra.
Sorry, I'm a little late.
Leo. I was really hoping that you'd come. I was like, oh no.
Oh no, I was gonna be here. Just give me a second. When I get my headphones on, I'll turn my camera on.
I need a minute too, so you're good.
I need a minute.
I'm gonna share the text on the screen now. Speed. My notes are all over the page. Do you think that will? What do you think about copyright issues if I just share one page at a time? Do you think there are going to be issues?
No.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be a problem.
Okay.
That should be protected under the
fair use.
The fair use, since we're kind of doing not really a critique, but we're discussing this and things like that. So
okay, is that so? What are the rules? Oh, it doesn't matter. Y'all will tell me later.
As long as you're not profiting by it, reselling it in some form, and you are doing a critical analysis, then it's fair use. If I were showing it like page for page and reading it to somebody and I was profiting on it, I mean, these videos aren't monetized, so
All right,
not a problem.
Okay,
this is run by an algorithm. I don't think anybody's going to care that we're discussing or showing this book anywhere.
Yeah, they're not going to get any hits. So
all right, then I'm going to go and share my screen, and then we can wait for Leo.
Put Leo on top. I think Leo goes on top. I go on bottom.
Okay.
I go on bottom. I do this.
I'm sorry, my notes are over it, but at least it will help me kind of think, because I was reading it. 1 second. Okay.
Midnight wanted to come in too.
Okay. So who wanted? Do we want to start then?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So
document pulled up here.
Yeah, philosophy of math, like just with any kind of philosophy, like it brings in all sorts of other things that like you need, like all these foundational tools that I call them philosophical devices, in order to get at the problem. And that's what the author, Øystein, I know how to pronounce it. He's a Norwegian, Lennebo. So that's how it's pronounced, I believe. But anyways, one thing about philosophers is that in most of their texts, they have no problem giving their own view. And that's pretty appropriate, even though there's no really established facts in philosophy. So I wanted to highlight that feature. Now, there are a lot of people, a lot of philosophers of mathematics and logic that disagree with this guy, right? I mean, there's disagreement all around, and it's very common. That's not a big deal. In fact, a lot of people argue that philosophy is one of the most gregarious disciplines, because in order to benefit your writing or get a good book, you want to hear people that adamantly disagree with you, just to make sure you hold up to criticisms before you publish. Yes. So it's very gregarious. I'm sure other disciplines are that way, but yeah, it's not a big deal that he's giving his own view despite there not being established facts. Okay, so another thing that he's a kind of neo-Fregean, right? I don't want to say that he's a logicist, which is, we'll talk about that later. But Frege's project was to reduce math to logic. That's what basically logicism is, right? He's inspired by Frege, but I don't think he does quite that. Okay, so as you can see, where I've highlighted is that it does figure into a lot of his writing, a lot of his thought. Okay, and in case
can we pause for a moment, real quick, and give a shout out to Doubting Thomas, who for some reason is allowing the words of this broadcast to assault his ears while he's driving. So I think we just need to give him a big thumbs up. And I would not have interrupted had I not known that he was driving. I don't want him to have to read a super chat. I mean, a live chat.
Yeah. I mean, and
Yeah.
I want to say that this is not me. This is not me lecturing. We if y'all have something to contribute, if you want to lead a particular page or any, that's fine, right? I'm just starting it, right? But one thing that we want to understand about the author here is that he is pushing back against this idea that mathematical objects and are just kind of made up, right? He thinks that they're discoverable. Okay, so if you look at the bottom of page of the introduction, just as I'll quote him, just as geographers discover continents and oceans, so mathematicians explore numbers and sets. The two kinds of object are equally quote unquote real and are described by equally objective truths. So there are, in some sense to him, that there are these mathematical objects. He doesn't want to say that they're completely fictitious, which is a view that he's going to talk about much later in the book, right?
I agree half with that. I don't think mathematics is completely fictitious, but I do think it's thoroughly abstract and invented by humans, the same way that maps are invented by humans. But that being said, nobody would say that a map of the United States is not an objective description of the actual territory or land that is being described. I would argue more that mathematics almost falls, and I think Speed kind of takes the same position, that it sort of falls out of reality, because there are objects in reality. They can exist in sets, and we can discover the various ways that these things can relate and the various operations that we can do on them, and that we have in a more abstract sense formalized that into a systematic language. I'm going to use that word loosely, that we call mathematics. That is my personal take on the matter.
And to that, people should understand the distinction between discover and invent. So someone like Linnebaugh is going to think that Sir Isaac Newton, Leibniz, Descartes, these are famous mathematicians, that they discovered what they've contributed. They didn't. They didn't invent them. Now, there are a lot of people that think that they invented them, right? So just to give a background on the author, he thinks that these are discoverable things ultimately. So just for lack of a better word, it is a bias, but it's a healthy bias. The fact that he's very open about it in the introduction is very common in a philosophy book, and we should expect to see, that kind of I don't want to say bias, but that generates some kind of expectation in the text, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was glad to see that, because I was like, oh, a philosophy book where I might disagree with, in some sense of it, the way that he views math, because you never know. My opinion could very well change. And if you want your views on things to change, you're going to have to challenge what you currently hold to.
And it is true that I think right now 40% of philosophers are Platonist. Right now, that's about abstract objects, not just math.
Yeah,
but typically, mathematics is sometimes regarded as a completely abstract, and if you think that they're like these there's this distinguished category from, let's say, psychological facts and physical facts, and you might think those are the same thing, in which case distinguished from the physical, then you're a kind of Platonist, right? Now he's going to talk about what there's like Plato and what he thought in his works, and then there's like the kind of Platonism, which is technically a Neoplatonism, not exactly. Right now in philosophy, if someone identifies as a Platonist, that's not espousing all of Plato's work with respect to math, right? It's just a general term for, look, there's this other realm of abstracta, right? And I'll mention that again. But okay, so. And that brings us to this second paragraph here, or first one of this page, is that I wrote a note here. I'm going to see if I'm right about it. But he looks like he wants to resist this like full blown Phrygian Platonic realm where the number 3 exists, just in a way where like a rock exists, right? He doesn't want to go all the way into Platonism, and I did do some research. Linnebaugh does not identify as a Platonist. I think he identifies as a structuralist or an abstract. I think it holds to abstractivism, but I don't know a lot about that. But from what I understand, that's differentiated from Platonism. So he's not a full-blown Platonist either. So on one hand, he wants to say these things are discovered, but not to the extent where we have to embrace Platonism.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we're going down,
Which, just really.
Yeah. Yeah, go. Oh, Leo cut out.
He can still hear us though, but I guess can't talk to us.
It's just as well.
I'm just not going to have the YouTube open because it tends to run at least marginally smoother when I don't. But you said that the author holds to sort of an abstractionist
I think it's
position?
technically structuralism, but they're
Okay.
variants of structuralism. And now there is, for anybody that's interested in structuralism as applied to philosophy of mathematics, there is an SEP, or Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, rendition understanding of it. So you can look that up. But I don't know a lot about it, and hopefully we'll learn more as we read. But if you're so excited, as to find out, that's the resource I would recommend, just to get a quick synopsis. So now there's something in the second paragraph that we must, I think, understand, that brings us to a very unique distinction in philosophy, right? Ontology and epistemology. Now, this applies to everything, right? What is a thing? What are math? What are numbers? What is their nature? What is their kind of being? How do they exist? This is all ontology, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the epistemological question is, how do we know them, right? How is it that we come to know them? So take a very famous philosopher, one of the most famous philosophers in the 20th century, Quine, okay? Quine was a kind of Platonist, but he was an empiricist, right? He thought that knowledge was ultimately derivative of experience. So ultimately for him to know the number 9, right, was to come to knowledge through experience of it, okay? But ontologically speaking, he was a Platonist, right? So there's Quine. His ontology is that, yeah, these abstract objects exist in a Platonic realm or something like that. But how we come to know them is via experience.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two different questions. How do we know mathematical propositions? And what are mathematical propositions and objects?
Yes.
Two different questions, okay? And that's what I think that the reason why I mentioned that is I just briefly saw mathematical knowledge, and I wanted to distinguish that these are two different questions, okay? So now I was wondering what anyone's view on this part of the highlighted red, but this is my interpretation, and I'm open to correction, right? As Speed said and Leo said, we all have, if you're a mathematician, you might focus on set theory, linear algebra, geometry. I don't know. There's all these subdisciplines in mathematics. Now, I think that what he's saying here is something like this, that as we get to different forms of mathematics or different practices of math, right, the way that we understand it might change in terms of our epistemology, right? And that just making commitments about math might apply to one domain, but not apply to the other. So I think that's a really rough interpretation. So if anybody had a different interpretation of that, highlighted in red, but that's the point. I guess in summary, like how we approach set theory is very different than how we approach algebra or geometry, perhaps. And so maybe our philosophy of math might kind of change with respect to what kind of domain of math that we're in. Hence the word pluralist. I think this is where the word pluralist comes from. And the fact that it might actually be foundational. So like, look, this is our philosophy of algebra, which geometry might rely on, which this might rely on. So it's gradually, that's my interpretation. I don't know if anyone has a different interpretation.
No
of what
shit.
That means.
Is my microphone washing?
I don't hear it.
Somebody's talking about background noise down
I think
here.
that was me. I had a timer go off, and then there was the kitchen noises when I went to take some stuff out of the freezer and put it in the
I
fridge.
am eating.
Okay.
So
There's no washing machine noise. There's just a lot of background noise, like you're moving something around or something like that.
I think I'm the guilty party. I'm going to mute.
But what I was going to say is, I thought what Danny said. I that's how I interpreted that, which I agree with it completely. I think that there are different types of math, and no type of math is like in all sense is going to be somewhat better than another. They have their place, and that's where I like the word gradualist there, because that's how I would view mathematics.
Yeah, I was thinking like if there's a go ahead, Speed.
I view everything as theoretic at
Oh,
the
interesting. Okay.
at the foundation, and basically they're all consistent and they're all based on that.
I think the point that the benefit I think that I see in this approach is that let's just pretend there's a problem with set theory. We don't want to say that there's suddenly a problem for the whole entire mathematical discipline, right?
Yeah.
And that's I think the understanding.
They have actually said that,
Right. So
and that was basically Russell coming up with the paradox, and that's why they came up with the with a further definition for set theory in order to save us from ourselves.
oh, does anybody remember? It's theory of types. I think that's what.
Yeah, that is the what is it, Zermelo-Fraenkel version of set theory, which adds basically takes out types. That there are types and sets, and the things are not the same. There's another category above it, and then from there you get into category theory.
Okay. So that's but that's the approach. He doesn't think that we discussed it. We don't want to continue. Okay. So another thing that I wanted to stress is that Frege once again is huge here, right? You went from Plato, who talked a little bit about math, and actually, really has a big impact on philosophy of math today, and then basically silence for a couple millennia, right? Silence until Frege came along and then revolutionized the whole thing, brought up the topic. Frege is basically the father of like analytic philosophy as it is today, inspired a lot of what happened in the 20th century, in the earlier 20th century. Big character, okay? And so as we continue today, we're going to talk a little bit about Plato, and then there's nothing, right? Up maybe until Kant. Maybe Kant had some considerations about what math was, but Leibniz and Descartes, although they were mathematicians, didn't revolutionize philosophy of math in the way that Frege did, right? Although they contributed to the discipline of math, they didn't contribute that much to the philosophy of math, right? Whereas Frege did. And remember, I don't know, Frege died in 1925, so that's the time period. Of course, Kant was before that. Leibniz and Descartes were before Kant. And Hume, actually wrote on, there's Hume's principle. I don't know, Leo, if you're familiar with Hume's principle. I can't regurgitate it. But, there was, people dabbled, but Frege was the big one in terms of turning everything upside down or revitalizing. So that's one thing that we want to, I wanted to bring up. But that's basically the introduction. Does anybody have anything to say more on
I have a
introduction?
question.
Yeah.
You were mentioning Plato and how he mentioned some math and then there was a big gap. But I remember reading in some of the dialogues of Socrates or dialogues of Plato, whatever they're called, they would kind of ramble off into this discussion of numbers. Did you ever study or run across that? And what are they?
We're going to mention it. I think it's mentioned here. So we're gonna talk about Plato's view essentially, or at least a little bit about it.
Okay.
But yeah.
But it was like a dialogue between two individuals within the setting of Socrates' dialogues. And this sounds like they're expecting numbers to be magic.
Well, I think. Did they use the word forms? That's the
Maybe.
term.
I'd have to go back and dig it all
up. We're going to mention it because Platonism is always been a stinger to a lot of.
If I can add something really quick. Basically, Socrates, as well as Plato, believed that we are born with certain innate knowledge, right? Socrates gives the example of the slave boy. Through careful questioning, the slave was able to, and then he could probably explain it better. But he was able to, figure out a geometric shape. So Socrates is like, well, nobody taught the slave math, therefore it must be innate.
Yeah, we could jump to that. I'm sorry. Can I just say midnight, or what do you want me to call it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Midnight.
With midnight, the essential issue here is that you've never seen, or we've probably never seen, a perfect circle, right? Or a perfect, 8-sided what's an octagon, right? We've never seen that, right? But yet we have a concept of it. So there's so Plato's solution is that, it must be therefore innate. But we're going to talk about it later, okay? That's now remember that as we go
there
through,
is there is something to Plato's Plato's ideas. Just go ahead. Never mind.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's still an impact today. There are Platonists today. 40% of philosophers agree with something like that, right? But let's move on to you see, this is chapter 1. We talk about problematic Platonism, right? A lot of people wish to avoid Platonism. There are a lot of, like, especially now, I come from a philosophy of religion background, so I'm quite familiar. There are a lot of Christian philosophers that want to avoid Platonism because it postulates a realm outside of the mental and the physical, and if God is mental, then there's some realm outside of God, and
despite Christianity literally being influenced by Platonism, but sure, ignore your history.
No, it's true that the metaphysics has been, but I'm saying, like, in terms of the forms, right? The form of good, like Plato's, for instance, moral philosophy had to do with the form of good. So something is right or moral if and only if your action conforms to the form of good in this other realm, right? So it's actually, while
in other words, piety.
Right. The metaphysics really set. There are a lot of things about Plato that did inspire a lot of Christianity, but with respect to, I'm just giving, like, the reason why it's called problematic Platonism is that this seems to be a problem for everyone, right? It's not just the Christians have a tough time dealing with it. They resort to nominalism, divine conceptualism, absolute creationism as a way to avoid Platonism, and naturalists and atheists alike, right? This is we want to naturalize everything. That's the tendency of a lot of experimental philosophy and philosophy. That's the tendency of a society to naturalize things, and so it's still something to respond to, is what I'm trying to say, right? So that's why he labels it problematic Platonism, right? It's always been something, and then there are the people that just kind of accept it. But so one of the things that this chapter introduces is one of the most important concepts to philosophy, in my opinion. And because I use it all the time when I do philosophy or when I write papers. And I know that anybody else that is mildly interested in philosophical literature or methodology is the word a priori. Okay. So there are going to be a few distinctions in this book that we're going to probably need, right? Two are really big. The third one, not so. Well, actually, 3. So there's going to be 3 definitely. Okay. So the distinction between a priori and a posteriori. Okay. The distinction between analytic and synthetic, and also the distinguish necessary and contingent. Now, these are all highly technical terms in philosophy that every professional philosopher is familiar with, right? Now, believe it or not, there are people, of course, that reject this distinctions, right? So he's about to give a distinction between a priori and a posteriori, right? Now, whether you accept the distinction or not, that's immaterial to the amount of usage in the domain of philosophy, right? So let's just get to it. Okay, a priori, a posteriori have to do with epistemology. Okay, they have to do with how you come to know things, right? So a priori knowledge is knowledge that you've gotten to by reason or pure reason or something like that. Whereas a posteriori has to do with knowledge that's gotten from experience. Okay. Now, there is something to note here. Many people here have heard of empiricism and rationalism, right? You can be an empiricist and accept a priori reasoning, and you can be a rationalist and accept a posteriori reasoning. What empiricism and rationalism are doing is where does it all ultimately come from? Where does it start with? I guess, right? So the rationalist is going to say, well, knowledge starts with pure reason, right? Empiricists are generally going to say that knowledge starts with experience. Okay, so just because you're an empiricist doesn't mean that there's no a priori reasoning, right? It's just that a priori knowledge doesn't start. Knowledge doesn't come from a priori reasoning. Okay, so we're not going to talk about empiricism and rationalism. That's immaterial. I just wanted to put that as a side note, that if you identify as one of these things, you can still accept the distinction. Okay, now, so 2 examples, and then we'll move on. So a priori, an example is, Trump has been president for 4 years. Well, if you understand that, you can also understand the separate, distinct proposition or truth that he's been president for at least 1 year. Okay? So Trump has been president for 4 years, might be known via experience, right? You have to go into the world, you have to investigate the world in order to come to that knowledge. You can't just sit there if you don't know, if you didn't know Trump was president, you can't just sit there and reason to whether he was president or not, let alone how long he's been president, right? You can't reason to that. You have to actually do some kind of investigation, okay? So that's a posteriori knowledge.
Quick
right?
question. Whose phone just beeped with the fucking Kim Possible team?
I was just gonna say that.
That's me.
Who's... Oh, that is so fucking cool. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Beep, 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 beep. I
Yeah,
heard
so-
that nostalgia just started to pour out of my brain.
Pretty much.
But the point, going back, so knowing that Trump has been president or has been president for 4 years, or was president for 4 years, that's a posteriori, right? Now, if someone said, "Is it true that he's been president for at least 1 year?" Well, given that you know he's been president for 4 years, you'll know that he's been president for at least 1 year. That's a priori reasoning, right? That if you already started with the proposition, right, that Trump has been president for 4 years, you can derive from reason using logic and whatever reasoning to that he's been president for at least 1 year. Okay, now, yeah, so that's the distinction, and it's an important distinction. And generally speaking, a lot of philosophers accept that math is all a priori. Philosophy is a priori, right? And so math, like philosophy, well, we can actually reason or use axioms or mathematical truths to get to other mathematical truths. So a priori reasoning is a big deal for math, right?
Yes, it is.
I will say that I think it's 12% of philosophers for some goddamn reason reject a priori reasoning. I think that number is starting to grow. I don't know what motivates that, okay? But I will have you know that it kind of shows you that there's no established facts here in philosophy. To reject a priori reasoning doesn't establish you an ignoramus or an idiot, right? So, but for our purposes, we're going to use the distinction. The distinction is going to be healthy here. And the author, Linnebaugh, clearly accepts a priori reasoning, okay? Anybody want to add anything?
Nope.
Okay.
I would be one of those that reject a priori reasoning as the source.
So you would be an irrational. Oh, sorry, you'd be an empiricist, right? Some kind of empiricist.
Some brand, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're different. Of course, they're different modes. So now let's get into abstract. Okay. Now, the term. So I'm just going to tell you the terms and the way the philosophers use. Right. Obviously, in other domains, these are not how the terms are used. I understand that if we're having a discussion, we can be clear about our terms and then try to communicate with the established terms, whether you use mine or anyone else's, right? So, broadly speaking, there are two things and two categories of objects in philosophy. Of course, you might reject one as existing, but I'm just telling you the word. I'm just telling you the meanings of the words. Okay, material and immaterial, right? So, things that exist, right? Material things are concrete things, right?
Yes.
And what concrete things, now this is a weird definition. Some people think of concrete as like tangible, right? That's not what it means in philosophy. Concrete in philosophy means it's able to engage in causal relations.
Yes.
Okay. So, so someone that might be a dualist, right, might think that the mind, even though it's not, that it's, guys, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. There's two. We're dividing the world in two ways, not between material and immaterial. That was my fault. I lost my mind. I meant to say that they're concrete things and abstract things. I'm so sorry. That's how the world is divided. Okay. Okay. My bad. That there are concrete things, which are things that engage in causal relations. And then whether you think that everything is material and immaterial, that's a subcategory of concrete things, okay, typically. But then there are also immaterial things that don't engage in causal relations, and we call those abstract, okay? So the number, if someone is dead on the floor, we might think of all sorts of things that would have caused it, but the last thing we think of is the number 9. Oh, it was the number 9 that killed Bob, That doesn't make any sense. The number 9 doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't cause, it's not an effect to anything, nor is it a cause to anything, okay? Sorry for the blunder, right? So the idea is that abstract objects don't engage in causal relations, whereas concrete things engage in causal relations. Something like a book can engage in causal relations. Something like myself can engage in causal relations. So I'm going to be a concrete thing. Okay. The material immaterial thing. Well, just understand that typically abstrata are considered immaterial. Now there are alternate definitions of abstract things, and I'll give some examples of why I personally have problems with defining it this way. But the way that the author defines abstract is what I've highlighted and read. Third, the knowledge is concerned with objects that are not located in space or time and that don't participate in causal relationships. So the latter is what I described. The former, to me, there's a question mark there. And
where it says not located in space or time.
Space or time.
Yeah, I would kind of have some issues with that as well.
Yeah, and it's not just me. There are a lot of philosophers that well, I'll give you one example in that we've talked about on Speed Stream. I know there's a lot of disagreement. The point is not to just not to flesh out those disagreements, but I will say that there is a school of thought that equators, longitude, latitude, centers of mass, that these things are abstract. So what does the equator look like? Well, we kind of, whatever you metaphysics is either that it's we talk about it, right? There is either it's fictional but if it exists, let's just pretend it exists, that the equator exists, that it's not fictional, then it would exist abstractly. The equator doesn't kill people, right? It doesn't do things. It's causally inert as well, right? Now there might be some contentious stuff in terms of whether it was caused, right? But it doesn't cause anything, and it's something that forgive me with the language here, that hasn't always existed, right? The equator of the Earth hasn't always been there. So there's some proposition at one time index where there is no equator, and then there's another point on the timeline where there is an equator, and it's located. That's the weird thing too. It's an abstract object that's located. Well, we can point it out on a globe, right?
Yeah.
Same with longitude and latitude. Same with the center of mass, right? So that's why I typically don't like to define abstracta in terms of not being in space or time, because there's a location to an equator, there's a location to a center of mass, and there are points in which time affects it, right? But I don't think, but based on what the little I know about the book, I don't think it's gonna matter. Okay, but I think that most everyone of the large consensus that abstracta doesn't cause anything, not the effect of anything with respect to numbers and stuff, right?
Yep.
So just as a side note, did anybody want to say anything?
Yeah, two things, Danny. First of all, we have exactly the same highlights on this page. Interesting. Nice. The second thing is, are you going to flesh out analytic and synthetic, or
is that in this chapter? Because if it is not,
well, it's not really. But
okay, we can go ahead. Do you want to go necessary and contingent? I think is next on the list.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you, I've read it, but it was a week ago because I thought we were doing this a week ago. But I'm looking. If I scroll down, I don't think they bring in the analytic and synthetic yet.
Okay.
But but just very briefly, analytic synthetic distinction has to do with, it's a kind of semantic thing going on, right? In the analytic is true by definition, whereas a synthetic truth is true because of some other fact, other than the fact that, there's something about the words, right? So typical example is something like a bachelor is an unmarried man. Well, that's true by definition. Okay. Now I understand synthetic definitions are a little bit, a synthetic statement's a little bit hard to describe, but this is how I would think of it, right? Synthetic means to make, obviously, right? We know that. If you can construct a world, synthesize a scenario where those two things are true, or where the statement is true, and you can also synthesize a hypothetical where it's not true. So here's a good example: Superman is Clark Kent. Well, the world of DC, the DC universe, was synthesized in a way where the man that is Clark Kent and the man that is Superman are the same referent. They're the same thing. Okay. But whoever created the DC universe could have made a world in which Clark Kent and Superman were two different entities, right? So the idea of a synthetic statement is that it depends on the world that we're in in terms of establishing the truth of it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. That's what it is very briefly. Now, we talked about abstracta, so let's go down. Yeah, I put in. I mean, these are. I didn't think I was going to share my notes. I don't know what I do. I basically paint a rainbow on this, but and I forget why I color coded. Yeah. Okay. One thing. This kind of goes back to metaphysics and philosophy as not having established facts. Well, what's really ironic, I don't know if it's irony, but is that math is one of the things that we cling on to for certainty, right? Like it's like Wittgenstein was one of the reasons. Oh, was it? No, I can't remember if it was Russell or Wittgenstein. You have to forgive me, but when they were, it was. I think it was Russell. When Russell was a child or a student, right? He loved mathematics because he could say this is certainly true, absolutely true, incontrovertibly true. Is that a word? I don't know, but he loved it, right? It's rock solid, okay? And later on, Russell is dismayed that all of the math that he was learning was depending on Euclidean principles, right? That, oh, what happens if we throw out these principles? Well, then what I'm holding on to is nothing anymore, right? Without those axioms in the Euclidean plane and whatever, right? So, but given that was just a side story. The point is that regardless, it's still something that people really like to cling on to as an example of rock solid, something that's absolutely true and certain, okay? Now, the author points out that this is like the opposite of metaphysics and philosophy in general, right? A lot of metaphysics, what is there? Is it all physical? Is it all mental? Is it both? Right? How can we talk about the world if all we have is representation? Wait, are these representations just the world? Blah, blah, blah. It's just like, it's all like mind numbing and like, what do I hold on to? It's overwhelming, right? But math we can hold on to in some kind of like, it's just a solid and successful manner. He's solid and successful science, as he uses the word science here to mean like something we can know, right? But anyways, it's still, but nonetheless, it's actually philosophically puzzling according to the author, right? Mathematics is philosophically puzzling, but rock solid. So our philosophy of math is puzzling, but the math is not so much, right? Anybody wanted to contribute?
I actually liked this part, just what you were going over, because it seemed to me, maybe I'm misunderstanding what the author's saying, but it seemed to me that he was saying that mathematics is puzzling philosophically because generally speaking, it refers to abstracts, yet it is still so rock solid, which is not what we would expect of a science, using it more the term that the author is, which I agree with completely. I mean, you think of physics, which uses math, but physics, at least within physics, they say we're not certain about things, but it's, there's still a level of solidity to it, but there's actual physical, tangible things there that we're measuring and quantifying. With math, those are just all abstract, yet it is still this thing that can give you extremely accurate, I don't want to use the word predictions, but descriptions of the behaviors of those abstracts.
I think go ahead, Speed.
Where my head is in the last 6 months is that we would find math puzzling yet rock solid because physics is puzzling.
Well, maybe I think what the author is saying, because I've heard this stuff before. I think this is what he's saying, and this is my interpretation. We all have the same words, but this is my interpretation, right? Mathematicians don't give a damn about what the philosophers are doing with it, right? They might be aware of like Platonism and what all that. They don't care, right? They're fine without it, right? They do their happy. Physicists, scientists, mathematicians do math, and they don't have to even think about all the philosophical applications, right? Psychology might have a little bit more problems, right? And maybe other kinds of disciplines, right? But I don't know if you're aware, but right now, the way the philosophical landscape right now, psychology and philosophy are starting to there's a marriage now, right? That a lot of philosophers of mind are talking to psychologists, and there's like a happy union at the moment, right? But that just shows you that if philosophy's got its finger stuck in it, then that's grimy. We don't want that. But the mathematicians are like, we don't need you. We don't need logicism and formalism and abstractism and structuralism. We don't need any of that. We're doing math just fine. It's rock solid. I think this is the idea, right? That while the philosophers are tearing their brains out with the confusion of what a mathematical truth reduces to, or whether it is reducible to anything else, mathematicians just don't care. Most of them just whatever,
Yeah, my comment was quite a bit deeper than that, and goes to basically the metaphysical structure of physics. So
yeah,
I'm just
trying
later.
Wait, hold on. If we're going to get into it later,
very quickly, I'm just trying to interpret the author. I think this is what the author is saying. I've talked to a lot of I took philosophy and math last semester in my graduate program, and I think this is what he's getting at in terms of what he's trying to say, right? Leo,
What?
Did you say something? Did you want to say something?
Well, no, I was going to ask a question for Speed, but he said we'll bring it up later, so I'll just.
I see. Okay. So
guys, I gotta go now. Now
okay.
This won't always be true. I just had something come up that I need to take care of. But I've enjoyed this.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Is there going to be a pop quiz next time?
Yeah.
Okay, I just need to. I just was making.
Yeah, hold on. We got to
make
sure that Scott gets his problem sets before he leaves.
Yeah, please bring me my homework. All right, talk to y'all later.
Peace out.
Yeah, so if we're going over that, math is, I'm highlighting on the screen now if you want to see. Math is extremely successful science. There's widespread agreement among mathematicians, like lots of consensus amongst mathematicians. This is talking more about, okay, so I guess this is moving on. I don't know what I'm writing here, or why I'm highlighting. But the point is that, there's some kind of indispensability aspect to math. So to be skeptical, he'll talk about this. Let me see. Okay. So I might be jumping 1.2. We already talked about 1.2, but I might be jumping a little bit. But he talks about this notion of in medias res, right? This is presupposing that math is rock solid. Linebo is not a skeptic about mathematical truths, right? He said so. The point is that like he gave an example with respect to beliefs and perception, right? No one here, and no psychologist, no neurologist or philosopher, we rarely, except for the extreme skeptics, right, are doubting that our sense perception is somewhat reliable most of the time, right? But we still want to know why. What is it that what's our justification? What's the explanation for why they're reliable? So in the same way, we know math is reliable. That's not what he's disputing. He's not a skeptic, right? Math is great, okay? It's reliable, no problem. We don't have a problem against you, math, but we still are doing an investigation of how do we understand it, right? Why is it, we want to understand the nature of it. So that's not as to doubt or be skeptical about mathematical truths, right? He talks about later on, right here. Oh yeah, I might have did. So we talked about. I'm gonna scroll further down. I can't find it, but it's fine. This will come back up later. But we talked about a priori, so I don't think if anybody wants to contribute about that. Let's see. Okay, let's talk about Plato's account. Okay, so yeah, basically the idea is that Plato doesn't think we can ever experience or perceive a perfect triangle, circle, or any of these polygons, mathematical objects. After all, even there's probably some minuscule imperfections to even, I'm not like a computer expert, but you would even if it seems like a perfect square in terms of your screen, it's not technically, right? Things are in constant motion, and it's going, it's just anyway. The point is that he doesn't, there's some kind of plausibility to this, right? That we've never seen a perfect polygon or circle. So where we have a concept of it, though, right? So there is a real question about how we come to the knowledge of these such things, if it's the case that we've never seen it. Now, I don't have an answer for that, right? And that's one of the things I want to understand in the book. Quine, being the empiricist, right? Well, I'm looking to him as one of the most famous empiricists, and to maybe provide an answer, right? How is it that you could come up with these things from experience, right? I don't have myself an answer, which is really interesting for me. This is why one of this book is going to be interesting to me. I want to see some of the models for that, right? But anyways, did we skip the no, we didn't. Okay. He talks about the boy. No, okay. The boy example, the slave boy is just an example of a priori reasoning, but I don't really think we need to focus on it unless anybody wanted to talk about it. This is the this part right here where he talks about the slave boy. This is just a demonstration of a priori reasoning or knowledge. But I don't think anyone does anybody want to. Maybe I can read this really. Yeah, that's Plato's account that they're innate, and they're a priori. Okay, moving on. Okay, let's talk about necessary and contingent. Whew, okay, so necessary and contingent are modal notions. So we have a priori, a posteriori. That's epistemological notions, epistemological distinction. We have analytic synthetic with semantic, right? And then we have necessary and contingent. This is modal, okay, which has to do with what can or cannot be the case, possibly be the case, impossible, right? That talking about how things could have been, you're talking about modal. Now, we don't want to, we want to distinguish two kinds of modality here. One kind we're not going to be interested in at all. It's called deontic modality, right? So I'm a teacher, right? And I tell I'm like, you can't eat in my classroom, right? Well, obviously they could, right? But what can't is expressing there is a kind of norm. You shouldn't, right? It's against the rules. That kind of modality is often used in colloquial language, and it is somewhat looked at in philosophy, but we're not talking about that kind of modality, right? A lot of people conflate the two, right? Oh, you can't do that. Well, I can't, right? They're equivocating. They're talking past each other about what they mean by can't. So we're only talking about a specific kind of modality. And with respect to, there are three kinds of modal domains, or four technically, four modal domains, right? Three of which I think are going to be most likely irrelevant, okay? Let's talk about the relevant one. Logical possibility, okay? So something that's possible in the logical sense has to do whether it conforms to logical axioms or logical truths. There in philosophy of logic, there are lots of these, but there are three generally accepted ones, and one of which you might not see in certain intuitionistic logics, which we'll get to in a second. But the main two that we would want to look at, so the main two is the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction. So A is the law of identity. A is not A is the law of not. Well, A cannot be not A at the same time in the same sense or way. That's the law of non-contradiction. If these two laws are violated in some kind of sense, we have a problem on our hands. We call it impossible, right? Why is it that a triangle, to say a triangle has no sides, why is that impossible? Well, because a triangle is defined analytically, definitionally, as a shape with sides, right? So it's a contradiction to say that a shape with sides has no sides, right? That violates the second law that I went. The third one is the sometimes they call it bivalence, or the law of excluded middle. This is going to be everything, every proposition, every P is either going to be true or false, or P, or it's either going to be P or not P, is what I should say, right? So Leo's either a lion or he's not a lion, right? It's not. There's no in betweenness, right? Now this one has extreme relevance in philosophy of math, and it sticks out. There's a whole broad of thinking called intuitionistic logic, or intuitionist about mathematics, right? And they reject this one. Okay, they accept the law of identity, they accept the law of non-contradiction, but they get rid of the law, the bivalence, and the law of excluded middle, as well as proof by contradiction. Why they do that, we'll talk about that later. It's very complicated. I'm not prepared to just give a quick nutshell, but if you're impatient, you should look at people like Michael Dummett. Okay, Michael Dummett, I think he died recently in the last 20 years. British philosopher, very heavily respected, was an intuitionist about math, right? And we'll talk that much later in the book.
Can
Okay.
you do me a favor, because I am brain damaged? You said there were 4 modal domains, and and the first one was logical.
Yes.
Logical.
Logical. I haven't mentioned the other 3.
Can
Okay.
you list them for me?
Yes. Okay.
If you don't, I'll never let it go.
Yeah, the three one. The next most used kind of modal domain or modal type is modal. You might hear modal type or scope too, in the literature, is physical possibility, right? So I can't throw a ball onto the surface of the moon, right? Why? Well, it's logically impossible. There's no contradiction,
You
right?
mean logically possible?
Sorry, did I say impossible?
Yeah,
I meant possible. Yeah, it's logically possible, right? There's no
Yeah.
contradiction, but it's
Yeah,
physically
physical.
impossible because given some model or law or theory, right? Whatever, right? So
Okay, wait. Yeah, you don't have to elaborate too much. Just list them or
yeah,
whatever.
okay, metaphysical possibility and epistemic possibility.
Okay, thank you.
If do you want to very briefly, one of the most controversial, it has to do with other laws other than physical laws and not logical laws that govern or constrain the world, usually laws of existence. Very common example is Kripke and Putnam's idea of water being essentially H2O. This is a kind of metaphysical possibility. Now, you will hear in the literature logical possibility and metaphysical possibility being used interchangeably, so it gets confusing sometimes, right?
Okay.
But so just keep that in mind, okay? But typically, metaphysical possibility relates to existence. If not, then it relates to logical possibility. Okay.
Thank you. My OCD is happy now.
And then the last one, epistemic possibility, has to do. Think of coherentism, right? That something is epistemically possible if it doesn't, if it doesn't conflict with your background knowledge or background beliefs. So I may not know if I could survive I don't know, physically speaking, I may not know if I could survive a fall from my second bedroom window, right? Second floor window, right? But it's epistemically possible. I don't know if it's physically possible whether I can survive it. I don't know. This is a poor example, but the point is that there's nothing in my background knowledge that would commit me to thinking that it's impossible or that it doesn't conflict. So I'm sorry, I'm not doing a good job in that. And that's actually metaphysical possibility is largely. I mean, personally, this is my personal view. It's mostly garbage, but the fourth epistemic possibility is useful, very useful. We use epistemic possibility on a nearly daily basis. There are some criticisms of it, which we won't. But the point is that in mathematics, we're not talking about physical possibility. We're talking about abstracta, right? We're not talking about metaphysical possibility. He's not going to, right? And we're definitely not going to talk about epistemic possibility. One side note, the word plausible usually relates to epistemic possibility. If that's plausible, it seems like it doesn't conflict with your background beliefs. It could be true, right? Think of it that kind of tied in. Plausibility and epistemic possibility go hand in hand, right?
Don't go full mad ass on us.
Well,
mad ass. I like that one.
Okay. Let's move on. So that brings us to necessary and contingent. I'm sorry. Necessary and contingent. Okay, so necessarily true. So now we're not talking about those other 3. We're only talking about logical possibility. So according to us, the logic people or people that employ logical possibility, something that's necessary, right, is something that's true in every case, every possible world. Yeah. So you can understand it counterfactually, right? They mention counterfactuals. Basically, like counterfactual is a kind of conditional where you're expressing some falsehood in some other, something that's false in this world and making it true in some other world. So like if there were 4 people in the stream, there were 4 people could potentially talk or something like that. Okay. That's a counterfactual because there are actually 3. Okay. But anyways, you can think of necessary truth is that in every counterfactual and every other case other than the actual world, right, is still going to be true. Okay, so something like mathematics is typically taken to be necessary truths. In every case, 2 + 2 = 4. Yep. In every case, the square root of 9 is 3. Right. So that's what necessary means. Right. There's not going to there are different ways of producing a necessary truth, but we're not going to get into that. Okay, so then the opposite of necessary is going to be in a contradiction.
I do have a question. Well, not really a question, just to provide an example, just because I'm curious to hear. Well, not really an example, just to say something to hear what you guys think. That is 2 + 2 = 4 necessarily true in a base 8 system versus a base 10, or is it stating that in any base system, if you take a whole and you split it into 2 halves, that's always going to be 2 halves?
I can say talk first, or no, Speed, you're muted. You're muted. So if you want to respond to that, and then I'll respond to that.
I would say yes, Leo. That would straighten it out.
Okay, so that in any base system, if you take a whole and you cut it into half, you're only ever going to get 2 halves.
Has to do with counting.
Yeah, in a base 10 system, half of 4 is 2, so there's 2 of those halves in 4. Because I was just trying to figure out how to look at that.
Well,
I thought that was
I think typically why the author is saying two. By the way, and just so you know, the author has a PhD in philosophy and an MA in mathematics. I think he's a graduate of Harvard, so he knows math. Okay, so he knows all the, and he knows much more than I do, and whatever he might plausibly know, right? The going back to my response is this. This is what I think why it's typically going to be necessary, because it's an identity relation.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I think that's what I was trying to get at with the. It doesn't matter which base system you use. If you take a whole and you cut it in halves, there's only ever going to be 2 of them. That's an identity thing, not so.
Now tell me if this is an analogous to what you were sayaying, but a bachelor's and unmarried man, those are identical, right?
Yeah.
But it depends on how you're using the words, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
In the same way, like if you're using the word bachelor to mean female, right? Then it doesn't. Obviously, that doesn't hold, right?
Yeah.
So the meanings of the words are important, right? And the meanings of the inscriptions of a mathematical statement are just as important, right? And I don't know if that's speaking to what you were saying or not. Okay. So let's
maybe we should invite Stephanie in on this one because she seems more in tune with.
So necessary, so the opposite of something that's necessary is not contingent. The negation of a necessary truth is called a contradiction, right? So a bachelor is unmarried. If that's necessary, if let's say that's necessary, or a bachelor is an unmarried man, if we negate it, then it's not true in any world, right? Yeah. Because if you take something that's true in every world, negate it, then it's going to be false in every world, right? Yeah. And we call that a contradiction. Yeah. Okay. Now, then there's the contingent, which colloquially it means depends on, and that's more or less. But we don't want to say that in philosophy because there's I'll explain why. Contingent means it could have been false or could have been true. So if it was false, it could have been true. If it was true, it could have been false. So the truth that there are 3 people in this call, that's contingently true because it could have been the case that there were 4, right? And then it would have been false, right? The reason why we don't want to say there's a dependency relation is that there's idea of bruteness with respect to certain truths. So let's say take the laws of nature, okay, for instance. These are usually taken to be contingent truths, but they don't depend on anything, right? They don't rely on some other thing, right? If they relied on another law, then that law would rely on something. You get an infinite regress of natural laws, and you don't want that. So at some point they stop, right? Maybe a theist might want to say, well, God sustains natural laws, but let's take that concern out, okay? They would be brutally contingent, meaning that there's it doesn't depend on anything. There's no explanation for why there's that kind of uniformity in nature. But it could have been another world, where Rick and Morty world, right? There could have been different brutally contingent truths about the natural world. Does that make sense? So we don't want to say contingent does not mean depend on so much as could have been true, could have been false, right?
Would the word nomenological apply there or not?
So nomenological the problem with nomenological with respect to okay, let me so usually those are no. So yes and no, depends on who you are. Okay. Some people think that there are metaphysical necessities, right? And so they're going to say they're nomenological laws that are necessarily truth. And so but I'm not one that accepts that. So the reason why we want to distinguish nomenological laws and physical laws, because all physical laws are nomenological, right?
Yeah.
But in the literature, not everyone takes nomenological laws to be physical.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's
I
part
agree
of the
with
problem. They want like some people think that Leibniz's law is a nomenological truth, not a law that's not logical, right? It's not like a law of identity, law of non-contradiction, but it's true in every world, so it's necessary. And
Mhm.
Leibniz's law, to me, just ends up cashing out what identity is, but it's basically what's true on one side of the equation is true on the other, right? All the properties, if A is identical to B, all the properties of A are shared also by B, right? That's basically Leibniz's law, also called the law of indiscernibles. Yeah, I think the law of indiscernibles of identicals or something like that. I just say Leibniz's law, easy to remember. But I don't think that's nomenological. I think that's just another way of saying I think A is A, right? But
Mhm.
some people think that there's some kind of necessary nomenological law that's distinct from logical truths. Okay, so let's move on. I don't know if okay. We talked about abstract already. I think that okay. I think I wanted to talk about this. Yeah. Okay. So this right here. Okay. So here's another problem. This is one of the reasons why he titled this the Platonist problem, right? So first of all, I don't know what prim means. I don't know what that adjective is. Can someone educate me? What is prim?
Prim?
I don't.
Oh,
Yeah.
he's just using that as an example of he
Respectable.
explained-
It means respectable.
Yeah.
yeah, there is no prim. It's nonsense.
No. It is. I just looked it up.
No, well, yeah, okay, prim. I get it.
I didn't know. I didn't know what that word was. He could have used anything else. But
What the hell is the definition of prim?
according to the
Sufficiently
dictionary,
formal and respectable.
yeah. So I don't know
Yeah.
why he did that
So
to me.
Argatha.
sort of-
Argatha prim.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
How long have you been listening, Argatha?
Is he here?
Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
I can't see our. Wait.
No,
where?
he's not here. He's not here. I just said that he's an example of prim.
Oh yeah. So like another sort of synonym could be like a prude, but there are some other things attached to prude that might not apply to prim. But so like because it says showing disapproval of anything regarded as improper. So somebody who's just like very formal and correct all
We
the
run off
time.
the
that
rails.
would be prim.
We're off the
This,
rails.
my girlfriend came in.
Hi,
you wanna say
girlfriend.
Hi, girlfriend.
They can all see you. I lost my StreamYard. Okay. That's my girlfriend. Okay. But anyways, yeah, that's right. Y'all are jealous. Okay. But the
Does
the
she have a
point-
name?
her name is Bing.
Bing?
Yeah, she's
Oh, yeah.
okay. But she's Chinese. She's from China.
You say I'm jealous, but do you know who Amelia Clark is?
Yeah, I guess
Leo
I'm
has
wrong.
a girlfriend.
Okay, so let's talk about this issue. Did we lose? Oh, we lost my screen.
Uh-oh.
Okay, there it is. Okay, so here's the issue. And I'll give you my personal view. I think this is a real issue. Now, some people don't, but I just for if you want to know my background stuff, I think this is an issue. So you might see a little bit of passion, but so I just throw away these examples for a second. Let's take this example, okay? Leo is male. Okay, sorry for assuming your gender. Okay, Leo is male. So Leo is male. Well, if you understand, and I wrote referential theory. If you understand a referential theory of truth as referential theory of meaning as helping you establish the truth of a sentence or a proposition, that's going to be true because there's something that there's a Leo, right, and there's the quality of being male, and that's exemplified in Leo, and so that's to say there's a state of affair in which Leo is male, and that corresponds to the sentence or the proposition that Leo is male, and it's what makes it true. So the idea is that on a correspondence or referential theory of truth, right, that there's some kind of relation between the actual thing that is Leo and him being male and the proposition that Leo is male that makes it true. Now, if there was no Leo, so let's take sure, let's take the present king of France is bald. This is a very famous example. Well, a lot of people are going to say that's nonsense or false, right? Because there's no king of France. France lost its monarchy during the Enlightenment age, or French Revolution, right? Around the Enlightenment. So it's nonsense. It's not. Most people don't think that's true, okay? Because there's nothing in the world that kind of establishes that, I guess, all right? If we say it's true that 11 is prime, then there's a question about, okay, if we accept something like the referential theory of meaning, or a referential theory, or some kind of correspondence theory, right? Well, that means there must be something in the world that's 11 that's exemplifying primeness, right? So that is, I think, a problem. Now, I don't think he gets into it on this page. One solution is just rejecting the referential theory, right? Okay, that which establishes the truth of a sentence doesn't have to do with what's in the world. Sherlock Holmes is a detective, it's true, and I don't think there's a Sherlock Holmes, right? Harry Potter has a scar, right? That's true. Well, I don't need to. These things don't need to be in the world, and that's a kind of fictionalism, which is much later in the book. Okay, so that's one way we can do it. Is we can talk about truth and falsity and just completely disregard this idea of correspondence or reference, a referent being necessary to establish the truth of a proposition. Any questions or comments? Contributions?
Not from me.
Yeah. So let's Frege. Frege. Let's see. The sentence is simple sub. True. Yeah. Okay. So this is basically what I iterated. Okay. He wants to reject that they have spatio-temporal location. It seems like I'm highlighting this. So this paragraph. So we're moving on from this problem to the claim that, well, these mathematical objects are not abstract. I think that now I want someone that I don't think anyone. I'm not well read to a point where I'm so comfortable in saying this. So I'm going to say it now, and then I'm going to look it up later to confirm it. But I think that John Stuart Mill thought that mathematical objects were empirical. They empirically exist. I have to confirm that. But I know there's someone out there, whether it be Locke or Mill, I don't remember, that think that they're not abstract in the sense that they exist independently from the physical world or the empirical world or whatever, right? And so those views are out there, right? So, but he's right that Linnebaugh, generally speaking, everyone accepts him as abstract. Frege I read half of his book. I didn't read the last half. But in the first chapter is the most interesting chapter to me because it deals with the metaphysics, a lot of what we're talking about. He, I think, utterly dismantles the Mill, or I think it's Mill, on this point that mathematical objects exist in like some kind of empirical manner. I think I can't put the argument I can't put that together very fast, but it's gonna be something like this. We have concepts of infinity, right? I mean, where do I go and find infinity to get a concept of it? Or in the same way that take all the numbers of take all the number of particles in the universe, whatever that may be. I'm going to be able to think of that number plus one, right? I think those were some of the concerns, right? So when it comes to infinities well, I don't think by the way, I don't mean to suggest that infinity is a number, okay? But it's a mathematical concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I say? What was the other example? Oh, like large numbers, right? Well, it doesn't seem like we could gather these concepts from like looking at a rock, right? I don't see. I mean, do I see a number? Well, you see one rock, Mill says, so you get the concept of one from that. But then you can just get a large number, and then you still have a concept of it without having to rely on seeing anything, right? So that's a crude rendition of what Frege might have said. So if you're more interested in that, it's actually a very short chapter, first few sections of Frege's book.
Which book?
Oh, I have it right here. It's right here. Give me a second. I'm more interested in his sense and reference, which it's not that book. Blah blah blah. My archived. I have it right here.
Was it in posthumous writings?
Do you have a lot of your books in PDF form, Danny?
Yeah. Okay. So it's called. I have it here. Okay. The Foundations of Arithmetic.
Oh, okay, that one. I thought I didn't think he wrote that many books. They had a lot of writings from him, right? But
I don't
oh, he
know.
wrote Begriff Schrift, and I think that was one by him, and I'm not sure what else. But most of it is like in reviews, people that have posthumous function and conceptual note. I guess he has a few.
The most famous, I think the two most famous, I could be wrong about this. I think it's the two most famous is going to be the Principles of Arithmetic and Sense and Reference. I think on Sense and Reference may not be a book though.
Begriff Schrift or Schrift? How the fuck do you say that? Begriff Schrift. In German, the German way. How do you say it the German way?
Oh, I have to see it. I've seen it before. I forgot.
I'll see if I can
copy it. I don't remember because I've only really gotten excerpts. I've read a lot of secondary.
Have you ever seen Begriff Schrift? It's a
no
fucking mind-bending. Where the hell is it here? It's in posthumous writings. I can't remember. It's like semantics, Lot 2, philosophy. Is it in philosophy of language? Fuck no. I'll find it for you.
Okay, let's move on. I think yeah, so we already talked about Platonism versus Platonism.
Begriff Schrift. That's his notation, Frege.
Yeah, I had to look through a lot of that, and I went right over my head. But but the point. Well, the next chapter I think has to do with a lot of what he's trying to his project, and we'll talk about that later. But
okay, good.
So I already talked about that Platonism in the sense that Plato's views should be distinguished from little case p Platonism, right? If someone identifies as a Platonist, they're not endorsing Plato, not necessarily. Okay, so we got to be careful about that. I highlighted this, and reality, right? So this is one of the problems for me in philosophy is understanding real existence and actual is of the existence, like there is something. So a lot of philosophers think that like there's different kinds of existences. Let me share you my favorite argument for the existence of God. Okay, this is it. God is a fictional character. Fictional characters exist in some kind of way, but not in our actual world, right? So God exists, but he's not actual, or something like something like that. It's silly in the sense that you could say God exists, but he's not actual, right? He doesn't have the same kind of existence, right? Sherlock Holmes exists, but not Harry Potter exists, but they're not actual. But so we have to. I don't think that he's being that horrible here. So, but it's good to note that reality, the way he's talking about a view, that's why he says are at least as real as ordinary objects, right? So there might be a sense in which these mathematical objects exist, but maybe not in the same way like a physical object exists or I exist, right? So there's equivocation on existence. So just be wary of that. Let's see. So very few people hold to the kind of Plato stuff. I'm trying to see where we want to go next. Okay, we're almost done. Okay.
That was an interesting point about patent law.
Yeah, I highlighted and I put haha. That's interesting, right? Because I think that comes back to the discovery versus invention stuff. Yeah. I thought that was interesting. Okay, so we talked about. I think we talked about the major themes in these first few sections. I highlighted a lot. Look at what am I saying? We must track the study as it is. Oh, oh no, I'm sorry. The whole medias res is for next time. I went ahead on accident. So we'll do that next time.
Okay.
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 So that was an hour and 15 minutes. Not bad.
Yeah. 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 That's pretty good. Yeah. There isn't a whole lot to grasp yet. So the next.
I think he said something about what was it? The first 4 chapters of the book aren't going to be like diving too deep into stuff. It's going to be sort of like just establishing some basics, something like that in the introduction. Let me go back up.
I might have missed that, but I think if we get to Frege, then that's deep stuff to me, but maybe not to y'all.
Do they discuss the number 1?
So we will discuss Frege's number, right? And but it's not going to, we have to differentiate again with all the sets. We have to go over. And Leo, I would hope that you do lead us on this, but we have to go over the rational, irrational, natural numbers, right? All of this stuff must be explained because it all pertains to these various projects. Because what might be a problem or something true of the natural numbers may not be true of the set of irrational numbers, and that might have implications philosophically. I don't know. We'll find out.
Okay. Cool. Good. We did okay today. So small bites. Probably get buried. I'll probably get buried at some point. You're muted, Danny.
Yeah, let's schedule the next sections. We should do it. We should be very slow about this, I think.
Yeah.
We don't want to sit here for 3 hours, and we're busy, right? We're all busy here, right?
We're busy.
I know it doesn't seem like I am, but I come and talk to you all the time. But I am. So let's. This is not my real book. These are my notes. Let me go to the real book. So in the book, let's go from 1 point.
What are you writing notes with in your PDF?
This Apple Pencil.
Yep.
Oh, you can do that in the iPad if you have a PDF in the iPad.
Yeah, it's called Good Notes. It's amazing. I use it. Let me show you. Well, I can't show you. Well, I can show you.
We could end the broadcast. Maybe you could.
Yeah. Well, let's establish our reading for next time. Do you want to do it? When do you all want to? Week or week plus within next week, or would you want a little bit more? Well, let's see.
1 week sounds good.
What? Okay, so then let me get enough reading material for 1 week. Then not too much, not too little. Okay, so we will start at 1.5. And Kant's view of math is going to be thick.
Go up to
1.8. You want to go? Yeah, up to Frege. Yeah, we'll stop at chapter 2. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say. We might as well just go from 1.5, finish out the chapter.
Let's do that then, because Kant is. Does he? Do we mention analytic synthetic stuff yet? Yeah, we do. On page 15, we got to get into the analytic synthetic stuff again.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Awesome.
Good enough. Should we end the broadcast?
Yeah, we should.
Okay, guys. Goodbye out there.
And I'm just want to say before you end, if you haven't already clicked the button, I appreciate everybody coming out. Math is not apparently math is not a strong suit of a lot of people, and I'm hoping that this is informative, diving more into the concepts that underlie math, which I'm sure we'll get to, and what it all means, how we should view it, which I think helps build an understanding of what math is, and thereby can build a better understanding of math.
Okay, Icarus says kindergarten, so maybe Icarus should be involved in this. Maybe you want to be involved. Email me. Anyway, okay, any broadcast. We'll see you.